Undercover boss buys coffee at neighborhood cafe, realizes staff can get proper meals with this. Simple fix. Michael Foster, 50-year-old CEO of Sunrise Cafe, sat huddled in a corner of the very cafe he had founded in the guise of an ordinary customer. The pale yellow morning light streamed down on his graying hair, illuminating the worries etched on his face. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the window, composing a melancholy tune that matched Michael's mood at that moment. He scrutinized every small corner of the cafe, every old wooden table. He had once personally cleaned every yellow lamp that cast the warm light he had always called the light of hope. This place had once been the greatest pride of his life, a place where he believed it didn't just sell coffee but also hope. Hope for young people who had come here seeking a better future. A young waitress approached, her hands trembling, as she placed a steaming cup of coffee and a plate of toast on the table. Jessica, a face both familiar and yet unfamiliar. Her eyes seemed to carry an entire sky of exhaustion, her hair disheveled from countless long shifts. Her voice quivered so soft that Michael had to lean forward to hear clearly, "Sir, I can only afford one meal a day." In that moment, Michael froze. His hand tightened around the hot cup of coffee, the steam rising like a painful reminder of the promise he had once made. No one at Sunrise Cafe should have to worry about their next meal. Yet here, in the very place he had poured his trust and love into, tears were falling over hunger. A single tear from Jessica landed on the tray of toast, mingling with the sweet smell of butter and milk that Michael had once thought of as a comforting gift for long workdays. But now it felt like a knife cutting straight into his heart, leaving a bleeding wound. He looked at Jessica, her eyes fluttered, glistening but vacant like a candle about to go out. In that yellow light, Michael realized the tipping policy here had been twisted. Just a small change could have made sure Jessica had enough to eat every day, but somehow the managers had turned it into a privilege, a power to manipulate. The staff's tips had been unfairly distributed. Just a small adjustment could have ensured they had enough to eat every day. Michael knew this moment would change everything. This was no longer just a cafe. It was an entire world of trust, fairness, and honor that he had once built. If he didn't act, how many more tears would fall on that tray of toast tomorrow? Michael Foster, 50-year-old CEO of Sunrise Cafe, sat contemplatively amid the soft yellow morning light in the place that had once been his pride and a second home for so many employees. Every step he had taken here bore the marks of the days he had stood behind the toast counter, carefully sharing out every dollar in tips, his eyes full of trust. For Michael, Sunrise Cafe was not just a brand, it was family, a place where he had sown hope and kindness for the young people, searching for a home amid the grind of life. This morning, the cafe welcomed a gentle sunlight filtering through the old glass windows, reflecting off the worn wooden tables, the same ones where he had once sat with his employees, sharing stories of joy and sorrow. But now the air felt heavy like his own heart, a heart burdened by the ever more apparent signs of unrest. Revenue declined. The turnover rate increased rapidly. Complaints about the working environment began to spread. Michael no longer recognized this place. The place that once shone with hope now smoldered with stifled sighs. He knew that no financial report or management meeting could provide a more accurate answer than his own investigation. So this morning, Michael decided to shed his polished CEO suit and put on the simple clothes of an ordinary customer. He walked into the cafe looking like a stranger, without a name, without a badge. Only the heart of a founder who yearned to find the answer to one simple but haunting question. What had turned this second home into a place people just wanted to leave? His steps were slow as he entered Sunrise Cafe, where the scent of toast still lingered. The warm yellow light still fell on every face. But today, people's eyes averted. Shoulders seemed to carry a burden bigger than the trays they held. Michael took a deep breath and looked up at the wall clock where the second hand still ticked slowly, a reminder of the time he had poured his heart into this place. Today, he would begin a journey to reclaim the dream he had once built, the dream of a Sunrise Cafe where everyone was treated fairly and filled with hope. Michael sat silently, his hands still gripping the hot cup of coffee. That warmth was a reminder of the mornings he had once stood behind the toast counter, distributing every tip fairly to the staff. But today, those memories were just a distant echo, fading in the tense atmosphere that hung over Sunrise Cafe. His eyes swept across the cafe, scanning the hurried steps, the averted eyes before settling on a familiar sight. Jessica, the young woman who had nervously placed the toast tray before him this morning. Today she was still in her worn uniform, her hair slightly disheveled, her thin hands deftly arranging toast and pouring coffee. But Michael noticed something different. She worked at double the pace of everyone else, her feet never stopping, the forced smile on her lips, as if every ounce of hope was being drained from her bit by bit. He furrowed his brow, eyes following her every step. Then, in a fleeting moment, when she paused at his table, Michael nodded to call her over, like a curious customer asking a question. Jessica lowered her head, her eyes revealing her fatigue, her hand trembling slightly. Her voice was hoarse from exhaustion, but still strong enough to reveal a painful truth. "Sir, I can only afford one meal a day. My tips aren't shared fairly. Only a few people get their full share. The rest of us, we're really struggling." Her words pierced Michael's chest like needles. He heard his heart pound, his breath catch in his throat. In that moment, he was no longer a distant CEO, but a father, someone who had once called this place the home of dreams. But that moment wasn't over yet. A janitor walked past his thin shoulders, hunched under a faded uniform shirt, holding an old broom. He paused, glanced at Michael's eyes that seemed to know who he was, and then softly uttered a sentence that sounded like the sigh of the cafe itself. "Here, the one who works the most is the one who suffers the most." Michael was speechless. That sentence was like a sharp knife slicing through all the trust he had once built. A painful truth lay bare right under the yellow lights of Sunrise Cafe. The tip-sharing policy had been distorted, turning this place from a second home into an unfair playing field, where the hardest workers were the most abandoned. In that moment, Michael realized he was not just facing a tip-sharing problem, he was facing the very heart of Sunrise Cafe, being strangled by greedy and ruthless hands. And he knew this was the moment he had to stand up to save the dreams he had once promised to protect. Michael took a deep breath. His eyes swept across the cafe, every chair, every soft yellow light, every downcast face. The Sunrise Cafe he had once called his second home now felt heartbreakingly foreign. Every step he took on the old wooden floor seemed to evoke memories of the early days, days when he himself had fairly distributed tips to each employee, giving them not just money, but also trust, hope, and the motivation to stay loyal to this place. But now his eyes met the shadows gnawing at this beloved home. In one corner of the cafe, a group of young employees, their uniforms neat, stepped confidently, their eyes gleaming with the smug certainty that the best shifts belonged to them. Michael watched them and realized they were the ones who were always given the peak hour shifts with crowds of customers and high tips. They laughed and exchanged knowing glances, making no effort to hide their quiet pride. The yellow light shone on their faces. The same warm yellow light that once felt comforting now made him feel cold. Meanwhile, Jessica and a few other employees, those who continued to work diligently with dark circles under their eyes and trembling hands, were always assigned the slow shifts with few customers and low tips. The image of Jessica's tear falling onto the toast tray that morning was still vivid in his mind, a tear that was both salty and bitter, exposing all the injustices that existed in this place. Her eyes stared into the distance, fragile, as if searching for a faith that had long since faded. Michael clenched his fists, his eyes resting on the POS counter, where the cold green light illuminated the face of a young employee. His fingers glided quickly over the POS screen movements, so practiced they seemed rehearsed hundreds of times. His eyes gleamed with a cunning cold light that made Michael shiver. He stood there watching silently as the tip amounts disappeared from the screen, sweat, effort, and tears of people like Jessica being skimmed mercilessly without a single word of explanation. In Michael's heart rose a searing pain, the pain of a founder who had once placed his absolute trust in a system that now betrayed him and those he cared for. A pain mixed with an anger like a smoldering fire just waiting to burst into a flame of justice that he would never shy away from. And then amidst that chaos, Michael discovered that Jessica had managed to record some evidence. Each crumpled piece of paper, her trembling handwriting, appeared like the silent screams of someone too afraid to stand up and speak out. Michael held the paper, his eyes red. He knew she was afraid of retaliation, afraid of losing her job, afraid of being shunned. She had chosen to stay silent, and that made Michael's heart ache with a numb pain. The POS beeped, that sound, which once made him proud of transparency, now rang like a cold, sharp knife. His eyes blazed, his heart pounded so hard it made him choke. In that moment, Michael heard his own voice, whisper hoarse but as firm as steel. "Did I let this happen?" The camera slowly zoomed in on Michael's eyes that glowed with an unyielding flame, the light of a founder who had once handed out every single tip with all his heart. In the yellow light illuminating his face, a drop of sweat ran down his forehead, mixing with the light of hope and Jessica's tears. Michael knew this wasn't just about a manipulated POS. It was about an entire system that had turned Sunrise Cafe into a place where the tears of the hardest workers were the ones most easily forgotten. And he knew if he didn't stand up today, tomorrow, there would be more Jessicas shedding tears over the toast tray and more hopes crushed under the weight of corruption. That was something he could never accept. Michael stood silently, his breath caught, as the green light from the POS reflected on his stern face. All the images of the once beloved Sunrise Cafe were fading, replaced by a fractured reality. He remembered vividly the image of Jessica, once waiting tables with bright eyes, her cheeks flushed, when a generous customer left a tip. Now those eyes had darkened with worry over her daily meals. Michael looked more closely and realized that it wasn't just Jessica. Many other employees were quietly bearing the same simmering injustice. The kitchen worker with sunburned hands and dark circles under his eyes from endless shifts, the one he'd seen sharing bread with colleagues to make sure they had enough to eat during shifts. The cashier with the frail figure stepped softly as if afraid to shatter the air around her. Every face, every step, every faint smile all carried the same silent plea: the tips weren't enough to live on. Each little note Jessica had hidden in the POS drawer was now carefully unfolded by Michael. The smudged ink, the shaky handwriting, but each one held a silent cry for help. Day 5, lunch shift, my tips were adjusted, not enough to buy dinner. Day 10, evening, shift POS shows tips as 0, even though customers left them. Day 12, Ryan was given the prime shift, high tips. Michael clenched his fist, his eyes blazing as if a fire was burning inside. A founder like him had once believed that a modern POS would guarantee transparency and fairness. But now it had become an accomplice to fraud. He looked at the POS manager, tall in a neatly pressed shirt, his eyes wandering lazily around the cafe, fingers drumming on the counter, as if challenging anyone who dared to question him. Michael remembered those brief meetings with the management team, when he still believed everything was clear and transparent. Now each fake smile, each evasive answer, each empty handshake felt like a knife carving into his trust. The POS beeped once again. This time it wasn't just a mechanical sound, but a painful reminder that he had once unknowingly let things spiral out of control. From a second home, Sunrise Cafe was turning into a battlefield of deceit and injustice. Michael sighed, his eyes drifting to the toast counter, where Jessica was still diligently cleaning. That petite girl, the one who used to make him so proud with her tireless work ethic, now had to endure sleepless nights worrying about her next meal. In the yellow morning light, her face seemed to blend into the salty sweat and the heat of the toaster. In Michael's heart, every beat seemed to echo the sighs of the weary staff. Every step he took felt heavy with the weight of responsibility. The responsibility of a founder who had once promised that no one would be left wanting in the very home he had built. On the last note paper, Jessica's handwriting blurred with tears. I don't dare to report this. I'm afraid of being fired. I'm afraid of those cold stares turning their backs on me. I just hope that one day everyone will get their fair share of tips. Michael closed his eyes, tears threatening to fall. In that moment, he whispered, Jessica, you've endured enough. The camera zoomed in on Michael, placing his hand on his chest, his heart pounding like a battle drum. His eyes blazed, no longer trembling, but shining with unwavering determination, the light of a founder who had once handed out every tip with all his heart. The sweat on his forehead glistened under the yellow light like Jessica's tears merged with his resolve. In that moment, he told himself, I let this happen, but I will be the one to fix it. And Michael knew if he didn't stand up today, tomorrow, there would be more Jessicas, more notes, and more tears falling on toast trays that he could never allow. Michael stood up, the old wooden chair creaking softly, echoing through the cafe like a wake-up call. The yellow light shone on his face, the face of a founder who had once poured his whole heart into building Sunrise Cafe with faith and fairness. Every wrinkle on his forehead, every crow's foot at the corner of his eyes, each one marked the years he had tirelessly devoted to this dream. His shoulders straightened, his eyes swept across the cafe, meeting the gaze of those who had called this place their second home. No more avoidance, no more hesitant steps, only eyes lit up, longing for justice to be named. His voice rose warm but firm, each word like a blade cutting through the veil of lies that had shrouded Sunrise Cafe for so long. I am Michael Foster, the founder of this cafe chain. His voice echoed, penetrating every corner of the cafe, stirring every heart that had once believed, and even those that had once doubted. The yellow light shone on his face, illuminating the hand, holding high a stack of papers, ink smudged, but as clear as the blood of justice itself. Altered tips, unfair shift assignments, threatening messages to staff. Every number, every line of text was like a knife carving into the trust he had once built. Michael stared directly at the manager standing frozen at the POS counter, his gaze so cold it forced the man to lower his head, his shoulders trembling. His voice dropped, but it was unyielding, each word landing like a hammer blow on the wall of deceit. This is your sweat and tears stolen by these very managers. From today on, every tip must be given to the person who deserves it. The cafe's atmosphere seemed to freeze. Eyes widened, hands clenched, hearts trembled with emotion. At the toast counter, Jessica stood tall, tears shimmering in her eyes. But they were no longer tears of fear, they were tears of belief, finally called by its true name, justice. The yellow light shone on her face, transforming her into a beacon of hope for all who had once stood in the shadows. That gaze shone with the light of unbreakable faith, the light of a founder who had once shared every tip with all his heart. In that moment, a drop of sweat slid down his forehead, blending with the yellow light, reflecting the years of dedication and sacrifice for a just Sunrise Cafe. The POS beeped a sound that was no longer the sound of exploitation, but a sound of rebirth for a Sunrise Cafe where justice was finally named. Michael knew this moment didn't just change the fate of one employee. It was a turning point for an entire system where the light of trust would erase the darkness of injustice. Michael swallowed hard, his eyes shining with a determined light, the light of a man who was fighting not only for his justice, but for those who had once called him Boss Michael. The whispers echoed throughout the cafe, each one now a symphony of hope and tension. He took a deep breath, spreading the stack of papers, the yellow light illuminating the crumpled pages marked by coffee tears and sweat of those who had once believed that justice existed only on revenue reports. He raised the stack of papers to eye level, slowly turning in a circle so everyone could see. These numbers, these tips, should have belonged to you. The people who stayed up late, woke up early, and endured the fatigue after every shift. His voice lowered, each word heavy as lead but still filled with human warmth. Yet you have been exploited by the very ones you called managers, turning your sweat into tips that vanished. The air thickened. A server at the toast counter raised a hand to cover their mouth, trying to stifle a choking sob. Michael's eyes softened in that moment, then flashed cold as he turned to face the manager, directly the one he had once trusted to protect fairness in the cafe. His voice was like fire, his gaze like a hammer. I once believed you would be the guardian of justice here, but you have betrayed us all. Each word struck the manager's heart like a dagger, making his shoulders tremble. His panicked eyes dart around the cafe, searching for an escape, but there was none. The POS beeped the pale blue light from its screen, illuminating his face, highlighting every drop of sweat trickling down his temple, every contorted wrinkle of a man stripped bare. Michael stepped forward, his voice sharp but still filled with calm compassion. Remember, every tip you receive, that's your sweat, your sleepless nights, your missed meals. I promise from today, every tip will go to the right person and justice will be restored. This is your Sunrise Cafe, and only you make this place what it is. In that moment, Jessica, the girl with once lost eyes, stood tall, her shoulders infused with newfound strength. The yellow light shone on her eyes, glistening with tears, but these were tears of rebirth. She nodded a pledge not just for herself, but for all those who had once stood silently by the toast tray every morning. Michael turned his warm gaze to Jessica, his eyes blazing, spreading warmth and trust to everyone present. He turned to the other staff faces that had once lifted with hope, only to bow in despair. They stood there quietly, their hands trembling, but clasped together, this time not in fear, but because they were waiting for a new Sunrise Cafe, a place where their sweat would be honored, where every tip would mean a warm meal, a restful sleep. The camera slowly panned toward Michael, the yellow light highlighting every crow's foot, every wrinkle, etched by the sleepless nights dedicated to Sunrise Cafe. A bead of sweat rolled down his forehead, catching the light of a CEO who had once divided every tip with all his heart. In that moment, the POS beeped again, but this time it was no longer the sound of exploitation, but the birth cry of a Sunrise Cafe of justice and compassion, where justice was finally called by its rightful name. Michael whispered to himself, "This is the moment when Sunrise Cafe regains its light. No shadow of injustice can cover it anymore." The yellow light of dawn streamed through the window, illuminating every corner of Sunrise Cafe where Michael Foster had once poured his heart to make it a second home for so many. Today it seemed to wear a new coat, no longer shadowed by the dark days of unfair tip distribution. The girl who had once stood by the toast tray, tears falling on each slice of bread, was now promoted to shift manager. She stood there in her new uniform, her eyes shining with a strange light, a light of restored faith, of hope entrusted to her hands. In every gesture, every smile, Michael saw the image of resilience, of integrity. From a girl who once cowered wiping tears from the toast tray, Jessica had now become a symbol of justice and hope, a guiding light for the other employees. helping them stand up to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Michael looked at her, his eyes filled with pride, because he knew that sometimes all it takes is one small change, a transparent tip-sharing board, a small sign next to the POS, explaining the importance of tips to employees. That's enough to create a fair and warm Sunrise Cafe. He understood that sometimes big changes begin with a single click, a short meeting, and a promise kept, a promise that no one will be left behind. Michael stood next to the POS, his hand lightly touching the screen. Just one click was enough to activate the transparent tip-sharing feature. Every tip now appeared clearly on the screen, transparent, leaving no room for dishonest hands. A short meeting was held. Michael stood there, his eyes meeting each person one by one, his voice warm yet firm. From today, every tip will go to the right person. Every drop of sweat will be respected. The yellow light shone over the cafe, illuminating the faces of every employee, faces that now gleamed with renewed hope. Jessica stood in the middle of the cafe, a radiant smile on her face, as she guided new employees on how to distribute tips, her eyes shining with the light of a better future. Her voice was gentle but firm. Every tip you earn is your effort, and you deserve to receive it. The camera panned slowly to Jessica as she gave instructions, the yellow light reflecting in her eyes. Eyes that had once been wet with tears, but now burned with the fire of someone who had been given hope. Michael stood silent, the sweat on his forehead merging with the yellow light of the morning. His eyes shone with pride, the pride of a founder who had once divided every tip with all his heart. He knew that finally Sunrise Cafe had returned to being the home for all those who once called this place their second home. Michael thought to himself, his voice rising softly but as strong as steel. One tear changed an entire system. On the screen appeared the final caption, bold and slightly slanted like a wake-up call. How many more waitresses live on the tips they never get? A question that served both as a reminder and an alarm bell, making the viewers unable to look away. And in the eyes of each viewer, there flickered an image of themselves, someone seeking hope, seeking justice in a world filled with forgotten tears. Michael stood in the quiet space of Sunrise Cafe, where the yellow light shone on his face, the face of a 50-year-old CEO, a founder who had poured his heart into making this place a second home for so many. His voice rang out warm yet firm, his eyes shining with the faith of a man who had once divided every tip with all his fairness and love. If you believe that justice is not just numbers on a screen, but every drop of sweat from those behind the toast counter, then share this video. The camera pans slowly, the yellow light streaming through the window, highlighting the Undercover Boss logo and the social media icons appearing on screen, where viewers were invited not just to watch, but to spread the belief. Michael turned his gaze to the camera, his voice lowering but full of determination, like the vow of a man who had once stood up to reclaim hope for his employees. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the real stories of justice and the people who dared to stand up to regain hope.